In the heart of a land known as the cradle of civilization, a building stood as a symbol of national pride. This was the Central Bank of Iraq in Baghdad. It wasn't just a place where money was stored, it was the financial heart of a nation, a testament to its sovereignty and its future. Within its reinforced walls lay the wealth of a country, the accumulated assets of its people, and the very foundation of its economy. The bank represented stability in a region often rocked by turmoil. Its vaults were meant to be impenetrable, a fortress designed to protect the lifeblood of Iraq from any threat, whether from outside invaders or from within its own borders. Imagine a place of immense power. Not the power of armies or of kings, but the power of currency. The Central Bank of Iraq held this power in its hands. Every dinar that flowed through the markets of Baghdad, every dollar held in reserve, was a part of its complex circulatory system. The men and women who worked there were not just bankers, they were guardians. They were entrusted with the immense responsibility of managing the nation's economic destiny. Their daily routines, the clatter of counting machines, the quiet hum of secure servers, all contributed to the perception of order and control, a perception that was about to be shattered in the most audacious way imaginable. The bank itself was an imposing structure. Built with thick concrete and steel, it was designed to project an image of strength and permanence. Its location in the bustling capital city made it a landmark, a familiar sight to millions of residents. Below the streets, deep within its subterranean levels, lay the main vault. This was the inner sanctum, protected by layers of security. Massive steel doors, complex locking mechanisms, and constant surveillance. To the average citizen, the idea of breaching this fortress was unthinkable. It was as secure as the nation itself was supposed to be, a bastion of financial integrity that seemed beyond the reach of any criminal enterprise. But what happens when the threat comes not from a common thief, but from the highest echelons of power? What happens when the very people sworn to protect the nation's wealth are the ones who decide to take it? This is a story about more than just stolen money. It is a story about the ultimate betrayal of trust. It explores a fundamental question. How secure is any institution when the rules that govern it are suddenly rewritten by those in command? The stage was set for an event that would defy belief, a heist so grand and so simple it would forever be remembered as one of history's most brazen acts of theft. The year was 2003. The world watched Iraq with bated breath. The political climate was thick with tension, a palpable sense of impending conflict hanging over the nation. For months, the drums of war had been beating louder and louder. The United States and its allies were poised on the border, their rhetoric painting a picture of a rogue state that needed to be disarmed. Inside Iraq, life was a mixture of defiance and deep-seated anxiety. The people tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, going to work, shopping in the markets, and raising their families, all under the shadow of a looming invasion that promised to change their world forever. Saddam Hussein, the president of Iraq for over 2 decades, was at the center of this storm. His rule had been absolute, his image plastered across the country on billboards and murals. He projected an aura of unshakable control, a leader who would never bow to foreign pressure. Yet behind the scenes there was a growing realization that a military confrontation was not just possible, but inevitable. The government began making preparations, not for a prolonged defense, but for the survival of the ruling elite. The focus shifted from governing a nation to preserving power and, more importantly, the vast wealth that came with it. For the employees of the central bank, these were uncertain times. They continued their work, processing transactions and guarding the nation's reserves, but the tension was inescapable. They could hear the news reports and see the preparations for war unfolding around them. They were custodians of nearly $1 billion in cash, a fortune that made the bank a very tempting target in a time of chaos. The security protocols were still in place, the guards still walked their patrols, but a question lingered in the air. Who would protect the bank when the entire country was under attack? The established order was beginning to fray at the edges. This period, in the final days before the invasion, was the calm before the storm. It was a time of last-minute arrangements and quiet, desperate planning. While the world focused on the military buildup, a different kind of operation was being conceived in the corridors of power. It was a plan born not of military strategy but of personal greed and self-preservation. The target was not an enemy army but the very institution that symbolized Iraq's financial stability. The pieces were being moved into place for a heist that would require no guns, no explosives, and no elaborate break-in, only a simple piece of paper and a signature. The plan was shockingly simple, almost elegant in its audacity. It did not involve masked men, secret tunnels, or disabling complex alarm systems. It relied on the power of authority, the unquestioning obedience that Saddam Hussein had cultivated over decades of rule. The central figure in this plan was Qusay Hussein, the president's youngest son and the head of the elite Republican Guard. Qusay was known for his loyalty and his ruthlessness. He was his father's enforcer, the man entrusted with the most sensitive and critical tasks. If anyone could walk into the central bank and demand $1 billion, it was him. The motivation was rooted in a grim reality. The Hussein family knew that their reign was likely coming to an end. The imminent invasion meant their assets, both personal and state-controlled, were at risk of being frozen or seized by international forces. The money in the central bank, specifically the vast holdings of US dollars, was seen as a personal emergency fund. The plan was to withdraw this cash before the bombs began to fall, to move it to a secure location where it could be used to fund their escape, finance a potential insurgency, or simply ensure a life of luxury in exile. It was a desperate act of self-preservation on a national scale. The key to the entire operation was a handwritten note. On the evening of March 18, 2003, just hours before coalition forces would begin their shock and awe bombing campaign, this note was drafted. It was allegedly signed by Saddam Hussein himself. The note was a direct order to the governor of the central bank, authorizing the withdrawal of $920 million in US currency and another 90 million euros. The reason given was a matter of national security, a vague justification that left no room for questions. The note was handed to Qusay, who, along with a trusted aide, would personally oversee the withdrawal. The governor of the bank, Issam Taleb al-Chalabi, was now faced with an impossible choice. He was a professional, a man who understood the rules and regulations that governed the movement of such vast sums of money. A withdrawal of this magnitude would normally require extensive paperwork and multiple levels of approval, but this was not a normal request. It was a direct order from the president delivered by his powerful son. To refuse would be an act of defiance against the regime, a decision that could have fatal consequences. The fear of reprisal was far more immediate and real than any abstract banking regulation. He was trapped between his duty and his survival. In the pre-dawn hours of March 19, 2003, a convoy of trucks and high-end vehicles pulled up to the Central Bank of Iraq. The streets of Baghdad were quiet, filled with an eerie anticipation. Qusay Hussein stepped out of his car, accompanied by a small group of loyal men. They were not there to fight, they were there to collect. There was no forced entry. The bank's governor, having received the order, was waiting for them. The massive vault doors, designed to withstand a military assault, were swung open without resistance. The heart of Iraq's financial system was laid bare for the president's son. What they found inside was staggering. Stacks upon stacks of $100 bills, bundled and shrink-wrapped, filled the vault. This was not digital money or gold bullion, it was cold, hard cash. The sight of nearly $1 billion laid out before them must have been overwhelming. The task of moving it was purely a matter of logistics. A team of bank employees was roused from their sleep and ordered to help. For hours they worked under the watchful eyes of Qusay's men, loading metal boxes and large bags filled with currency onto the waiting trucks. It was a surreal scene, a silent, methodical draining of a nation's wealth. Imagine the sheer physical weight of the money. $1 billion in $100 bills weighs approximately 10 tons. It took the crew nearly 5 hours to load it all. The sun was beginning to rise over Baghdad as the last box was placed onto a flatbed truck. The convoy, now laden with the fortune, prepared to depart. There was no fanfare, no sirens, just the quiet rumble of engines. Qusay Hussein had successfully executed the largest bank heist in history without firing a single shot. He simply presented a note, and the vault was his. The trucks melted away into the city, disappearing just as the first air raid sirens began to wail across the capital. The scene was cinematic in its simplicity and its scale. The tension was not in the act of the robbery itself, but in the context surrounding it. As Qusay's convoy drove away with the cash, American stealth bombers were already in the air, heading towards their targets in Baghdad. The heist was a race against time, a final desperate act of a dying regime. The money was gone, vanished into the chaos of the impending war. The bank's employees were left behind, standing in a nearly empty vault, shell-shocked and uncertain of what they had just participated in. They were witnesses to a crime, but the perpetrator was the state itself. When American forces finally entered Baghdad in early April, they moved quickly to secure key government buildings. The Central Bank of Iraq was a top priority. Soldiers from the United States Army's 3rd Infantry Division surrounded the building, expecting to find resistance or perhaps a booby-trapped vault. Instead, they found a sense of bewildered calm. The bank's employees were still there, trying to make sense of what had happened. When the American officials, accompanied by financial experts, were led down to the main vault, they were met with a stunning sight. It was mostly empty. The scale of the theft was immediately apparent. The initial discovery sent shockwaves through the Coalition Provisional Authority, the temporary governing body set up by the United States. The investigators' first task was to piece together the timeline. They interviewed the bank governor, Al-Chalabi, and other staff members who had been present during the heist. Their story was consistent and terrifyingly simple. They spoke of the handwritten note, the arrival of Qusay Hussein, and the hours spent loading trucks with cash. They had been powerless to stop it. The paper trail, or lack thereof, confirmed their accounts. There were no official transaction records, only a single fear-induced order. The news of the heist quickly became a global story. It was a symbol of the corruption and impunity of Saddam's regime. For the Iraqi people, who were already reeling from years of sanctions and the devastation of the invasion, it was another profound betrayal. The money that was stolen belonged to them. It was meant to rebuild their country, to fund hospitals, schools, and infrastructure. Its disappearance was a crippling blow to the future of a post-Saddam Iraq. The empty vault became a powerful metaphor for a nation that had been hollowed out from the inside by its own leaders. As the investigation deepened, the sheer audacity of the crime became clearer. There was no mystery to solve, no complex web of criminals to untangle. The culprits were known, and the method was brute force authority. The challenge was not figuring out who did it, but rather answering a much more difficult question: where did all the money go? The $1 billion had vanished into the fog of war. The hunt for the cash would become one of the most frustrating and bizarre treasure hunts in modern history, a search that would lead investigators down a labyrinth of dead ends and strange discoveries. The search for the missing $1 billion began almost immediately. U.S. forces, now occupying the country, launched a massive effort to track down the cash. It was honestly like looking for a needle in a haystack, but the needle was made of 10 tons of $100 bills. The primary suspects, Saddam Hussein and his sons Uday and Qusay, were in hiding. It was widely believed that they had taken the money with them to fund their life on the run and to orchestrate a resistance against the coalition forces. Every raid on a suspected Ba'athist safe house was also a search for stacks of cash. The first major breakthrough came in a rather unexpected way. Soldiers from the 101st Airborne Division were raiding a palace belonging to Uday Hussein. Hidden in one of the opulent rooms, they found not the main stash but a significant sum of money. However, this was just a fraction of the total. Then a more substantial discovery was made. An informant led U.S. troops to a small, unassuming house in one of Baghdad's residential neighborhoods. There, hidden in plain sight, they found metal boxes containing approximately $650 million. The serial numbers on the bills were traced back to the Federal Reserve, confirming they were part of the stolen funds from the central bank. The discovery was a major victory for the investigators, but it also deepened the mystery. Qusay Hussein, who had overseen the heist, was killed in a firefight with U.S. troops in July 2003, along with his brother Uday. They could no longer be interrogated about the location of the remaining money. Saddam Hussein was captured in December of that year, found hiding in a small underground bunker. While he was defiant, he offered no clear answers about the fate of the missing hundreds of millions. The trail seemed to be going cold, with the key players either dead or uncooperative. The human side of this hunt was filled with a mix of determination and frustration. The American soldiers and financial investigators were on a mission to recover what they saw as the Iraqi people's money. They felt a sense of duty to return it. On the other side were the remnants of the old regime, loyalists who had likely helped hide the cash. For them, it was a matter of survival and continued defiance. The money was a weapon, a tool to be used against the occupation. The hunt was not just a financial investigation, It was a part of the ongoing conflict for control of Iraq's future. While the recovery of $650 million was a success, it left a significant portion of the money, over $300 million, unaccounted for. The hunt for this remaining fortune became a complex and often bizarre affair. The money seemed to have splintered, scattered across Iraq and possibly beyond its borders. Investigators followed countless leads, chasing rumors and intelligence reports that led them on a wild goose chase. Some tips suggested the money was buried in the desert. Others claimed it had been smuggled into neighboring countries like Syria or Jordan, where it could be laundered and used to fund extremist groups. The chaos of post-invasion Iraq provided the perfect cover for the money to disappear. The country was awash with cash, both from the heist and from the massive influx of U.S. funds for reconstruction. Record-keeping was poor, and accountability was almost non-existent. It became incredibly difficult to distinguish between the stolen bank funds and other sources of currency. Some of the missing money likely ended up in the hands of various insurgent groups, who used it to buy weapons and pay fighters. In this way, the heist directly fueled the violence that would plague Iraq for years to come. There were also strange and unconfirmed stories that emerged. One persistent rumor was that some of the recovered cash, and perhaps some of the unrecovered cash, was pilfered by American soldiers and contractors. The environment was a free-for-all, with pallets of shrink-wrapped dollars being moved around the country with minimal oversight. While several individuals were later prosecuted for theft of reconstruction funds, no definitive link was ever proven between these cases and the original central bank heist. The truth became buried under layers of speculation, accusation, and the general confusion of a country at war. To this day, the final destination of the remaining hundreds of millions is unknown. It has become one of the great unsolved mysteries of the Iraq War. Did it end up in the private bank accounts of former regime officials? Was it all spent funding the insurgency? Or is some of it still hidden, buried in a forgotten location waiting to be discovered? The trail has gone cold, and the chances of ever accounting for every last dollar are virtually zero. The money has effectively vanished, absorbed into the black markets and shadow economies of a fractured and turbulent region, a ghost of the past that continues to elude capture. The great heist of the central bank left a deep and lasting scar on the Iraqi psyche. It was more than just a financial loss, it was a profound symbol of the ultimate betrayal. The very leaders who had claimed to be the protectors of the nation were the ones who plundered it in their final hours. This act shattered any remaining trust the people had in their government and its institutions. In the years that followed, as Iraq struggled to build a new democracy, this legacy of mistrust proved to be a formidable obstacle. How could people believe in a new system when the old one had collapsed into such spectacular corruption? The story of the heist became a modern legend in Iraq, told and retold in coffee shops and homes across the country. It fueled a sense of cynicism that permeated society. Many Iraqis came to believe that all politicians, regardless of their affiliation, were ultimately self-serving. This sentiment was not helped by the widespread corruption that plagued the post-Saddam governments. The heist set a precedent, creating a perception that public office was an opportunity for personal enrichment. The empty vault became a symbol not just of Saddam's greed, but of a deeper, more systemic problem that the country has struggled with ever since. For the international community, the heist served as a stark lesson in the complexities of nation building. It highlighted the fact that removing a dictator was only the first step. Dealing with the aftermath, including the recovery of stolen assets and the establishment of transparent institutions, was a much harder task. The inability to recover all the money and hold everyone accountable was seen as a failure of the coalition authorities. It added to the narrative that the invasion, despite its stated goals of liberation, had unleashed a new era of chaos and plunder, making it difficult to secure a stable and prosperous future for the country. Today, nearly 2 decades later, the story of the heist continues to resonate. It is a reminder of a pivotal moment when Iraq's old order collapsed and its future was thrown into uncertainty. For a generation of Iraqis, it is a foundational story of their modern history, explaining the roots of the corruption and instability that have defined their lives. The stolen $1 billion was not just currency, it was $1 billion worth of hope for a better future, snatched away in the dead of night. The physical money may be gone, but the emotional and political impact of its theft continues to echo through the fractured nation. The final chapter of this story is one without a clean resolution. The great heist of the Central Bank of Iraq did not end with the capture of a master criminal, or the triumphant return of all the stolen loot. Instead, it dissolved into the chaos of history, leaving behind a legacy of mistrust and unanswered questions. The event stands as a monumental testament to how easily the systems we build to protect ourselves can be turned against us. It demonstrated that the greatest threat to a nation's wealth may not be a sophisticated thief, but the unchecked power of its own leaders. This heist reshaped the global understanding of financial security. Banks and governments around the world took note. The incident underscored the vulnerability of physical cash reserves in times of extreme political instability. It prompted a re-evaluation of security protocols, not just against external threats but against internal ones as well. The idea that a head of state could simply write a note and walk away with $1 billion forced regulators to consider scenarios that were previously thought to be impossible. It was a wake-up call for the entire international financial system. For Iraq, the legacy is far more personal and painful. The heist is woven into the very fabric of its recent history. It marks the end of one era of tyranny and the beginning of another period of struggle, marked by war, insurgency, and pervasive corruption. The missing money is a constant, nagging reminder of what could have been, of the schools, hospitals, and roads that were never built. It feeds a narrative of victimhood and betrayal that has been difficult to overcome, complicating efforts to foster national unity and public faith in government. Ultimately, the story of the central bank heist is a human story. It is about fear, greed, and the abuse of power. It is about the ordinary bank employees forced to participate in a crime and the soldiers tasked with cleaning up the mess. It is about a nation's wealth being treated as a personal piggy bank. The event serves as a timeless cautionary tale. It teaches us that the true foundation of a nation's wealth is not the gold or cash in its vaults, but the trust its people have in their institutions. And once that trust is broken on such a spectacular scale, it is incredibly difficult to ever get back.